And we continue. Anticipate the other's power moves. As you develop your plan B, it is wise to think through the other's possible power moves. If you say no to the other's demand, what can they do to compel you to come back down? Whoa. What can they do to compel you to back down? And what can you do to empower your no so that you can continue to stand your ground? The first one is take away their stick. If the other's reaction to our no is to hurt or threaten us, our first instinct may be to hurt them back. A more effective strategy, however, is to neutralize the impact of their behavior. If, as in the story of the Zen master, they are threatening to hit you with a stick, don't hit them back. Just take away the stick. In other words, don't attack the other, but simply remove their ability to attack you. Imagine that you are dealing with a difficult customer who makes an unreasonable demand on you to lower your price. If you say no, you anticipate, based on previous history, that his response will be to get angry and go over your head to your boss in order to get his way. One way to counter this tactic is to speak to your boss in advance and explain that the customer will likely come and ask for a discount. Ask your boss to refer the customer politely back to you. If there is any potential for flexibility in pricing, it should be yours to show. Otherwise, the customer will always turn to the boss in the future, reducing you to the role of a messenger. All right. When the customer then threatens to talk to your boss, you can say, please feel free. Here is their number. You have just taken away the customer's stick. This strategy of taking away the other's stick without attacking them was used to great effect during the 1962 Cuban Missile Crisis. I had the privilege of participating in a meeting in Moscow in 1989 that convened many of the key participants who were still living. My colleagues and I listened spellbound as former U.S. Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara, former U.S. National Security Advisor McGeorge Bundy, former Soviet Foreign Minister Andrei Gromyko, former Soviet Ambassador to the United States Anatoly Dobrynin, and others tried to piece together the full story of what really happened during those tense 13 days in which the world's future hung in the balance. Among the many lessons, one stood out for me. It was how close we came to Armageddon without intending it, and how fortunate we all are that both U.S. and Soviet officials were so skillful with their no's. As you may remember, the Americans had discovered that the Soviets had dispatched nuclear missiles by ship to Cuba, where they would target the United States. President Kennedy knew he had to say no, but was unsure how to stop the Soviets without starting World War III. He tasked a group of his closest political and military advisors to come up with a plan. The Plan B they devised in case diplomacy did not work was to order an airstrike on Cuba and follow it with an invasion. For the first 2 days of discussion, they had no plan. As we found out during those Moscow meetings, that Plan B, which came perilously close to being implemented, would in all likelihood have been disastrous. Unbeknownst to the U.S. leadership at the time, the Soviets had over 40,000 troops deployed. The Cubans had over 250,000 well-trained troops prepared to fight. And in case of American attack, the Soviet forces were authorized to use nuclear missiles, some of which had already been activated. "That was horrifying," said Robert McNamara. "It meant that had a U.S. invasion been carried out, if the missiles had not been pulled out, there was a 99% probability that nuclear war would have been initiated." Fortunately, prodded by the president's brother, Robert Kennedy, the political and military advisors searched for a more creative Plan B, one that, instead of attacking, focused on taking away the stick. The plan called for a quarantine of Cuba, a naval blockade that would stop the Soviet ships carrying nuclear missiles from arriving in Cuba. That quarantine succeeded in underscoring Kennedy's no, and buying precious time for Robert Kennedy and Anatoly Dobrynin to forge an informal agreement whereby Soviet missiles were withdrawn from Cuba, and, as had been President Kennedy's intention all along, American missiles were pulled out of Turkey. Without the constructive Plan B and the skillful diplomacy that followed it, we might not be here today. Next is consider the worst case. It can also be useful to think through in advance the worst case scenario. What is the worst thing the other can do to you if you say no to them? The purpose of this exercise is not to create unnecessary fear for yourself, but rather to distinguish fear from reality. As an executive once told me, when I'm in a tough spot in a business negotiation, I find it helpful to ask myself, what's the worst thing they could do to me? If they're not going to literally kill me, then I'm probably going to survive. I'll be okay. Then I start to relax and I can negotiate more effectively. He has a point. In moments of tension, we tend to let our anxiety and fear magnify the potential consequences of saying no. When we take a clear-eyed look, we come to realize that those consequences are usually not as bad as our imaginations can lead us to believe. Then, prepared for whatever comes, we can boldly stand up for ourselves and for our concerns. The next part is reassess your decision to say no. Now that you have uncovered your yes and developed a strong Plan B to empower your no, you are in a position to ask yourself the question, should I say no? The presumption may be yes, but it is always wise during your preparation process to reassess your decision. After all, saying no may carry significant costs and risks for you and for the other. Saying no often means entering into contention with the other, and you will want to choose your battles carefully. Here is a way to think through your decision. Ask yourself 3 questions. In deciding whether to say no, it is wise to ask yourself 3 questions. Do I have the interest in saying no? Do I have the power? Do I have the right? We go over the first one. Do I have the interest? Will saying no protect or advance a key interest of yours worth buying a possible struggle with the other, especially now that you understand their interests? Listen to your inner voice. If your intention is clear and strong, that is a good sign to go ahead. The next question, do I have the power? Do you have the ability to sustain your no and to ride out the other's forceful reaction? Is your plan B sound? If so, that is a sign to go ahead. And the final question, do I have the right? In some situations, we may ask ourselves whether we are even allowed to say no. Do I have the right to say no? Am I allowed to say no in this situation? In some situations, asking ourselves this question may be valid. If we have made a promise or signed a contract, it may not be right to break it. But in too many situations of abuse, inappropriate behavior, or unreasonable demands, we accommodate because we feel unsure about whether we have the right to say no. Battered spouses, for instance, ask themselves whether they have the right to leave the marriage. They do. In the final analysis, the answer is that we all have the right to say no. It is our fundamental birthright as a human being. The hallmark of a free person is their right to make decisions for themselves and to take the consequences. It is not always easy to say no, particularly to people on whom we depend. In case of doubt, it helps to remind yourself, after doing the work of preparation, that you have a compelling interest to say no, the power to say no, and the right to say no. When your interests, power, and rights are aligned, very little can stop you. Remember that your duty is not to say yes to the other, whoever they may be, but simply to give them respect, which you can do as you say no. Respect is the subject of this next chapter. That is the end of chapter 2. Our next chapter is respecting your ways to yes. Thank you for listening and watching and being with me. I appreciate you. We're still reading from the book, The Power of a Positive No by William Ury, which is Ury. Thank you again.